Open the backpack. Malik Carter stopped with one hand still resting on the pharmacy counter, certain for half a second that the manager had to be speaking to somebody else. The fluorescent lights hummed above him, cold and white, reflecting off rows of cough medicine and vitamin bottles. Behind the counter, a prescription printer clicked steadily. Malik turned. Richard Coleman, the store manager, stood beside a security guard near the automatic doors. "Excuse me?" Malik asked. Richard pointed toward the worn black backpack hanging from Malik's shoulder. "I said open your backpack." 3 customers waiting near register 3 looked over. Malik felt their attention before he met their eyes. 10 minutes earlier, nobody had noticed him. Now everyone did. "Why?" Malik asked. Richard folded his arms. "We need to clear something up." "About what?" "About the elderly gentleman you were talking to." Malik stared at him. "Mr. Henry?" Richard's expression tightened. "So you know his name?" "He told me his name." "And what exactly were you doing with him?" Malik could hear the suspicion underneath the question. He glanced toward the pharmacy counter where Henry Whitmore had been standing earlier, shoulders bent beneath an old olive green veteran's cap, counting bills twice because his hands would not cooperate. Henry was gone now. Only a white paper pharmacy bag remained visible behind the counter, waiting among dozens of others. "I was helping him," Malik said. Richard gave a small, humorless breath. "That's not what it looked like." Malik's fingers tightened around his backpack strap. He had come back for one reason. His phone. He had left it on a plastic chair beside the blood pressure machine, realized it halfway to the bus stop, and hurried back before the next bus arrived. He had expected to walk inside, grab it, and leave. Instead, Richard had intercepted him before he made it 15 feet past the entrance. "What did it look like?" Malik asked. Richard glanced toward the security guard. "We saw you standing close to an older customer while he had his wallet out. Then you left quickly. Now you're back." "Because I forgot my phone." "That's what you're saying." Malik looked at him for a long second. Heat climbed beneath the collar of his school hoodie, but his voice stayed level. "Did Mr. Henry tell you I took something from him?" Richard hesitated. He didn't have to. That answer changed something in Malik's face. Not anger. Something quieter. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. A woman holding a shopping basket stopped pretending to study the gum display. Malik slowly slipped one hand into the front pocket of his jeans. Richard stiffened. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Malik froze. The pharmacy suddenly seemed impossibly quiet. Even the electronic beep from register 2 sounded sharp. Malik withdrew his hand carefully, holding a folded receipt between 2 fingers. "This is what I was reaching for." Richard looked at it, but didn't move. Malik unfolded the paper on the counter and smoothed it flat with his palm. Near the bottom was a charge for $24. "Read it," Malik said. "That's the copay for his heart medication." Richard's eyes flicked toward the receipt. "That doesn't explain everything. It explains why I was standing beside him. We still need to check the bag." Malik looked down at his backpack, then toward the dark glass dome mounted above register 3. A camera stared silently back at him. He lifted his eyes to Richard. "Before you search anything," Malik said, his voice calm enough to make the manager pause, "check your camera." Richard's jaw tightened. "Security can handle this." Malik pushed the receipt gently across the counter. "Then let security handle the truth, too." The guard looked at Richard. Richard looked at the receipt. Nobody moved. Malik could feel every pair of eyes in the store waiting to see which mattered more, what the manager had assumed, or what the camera had actually seen. 25 minutes earlier, Malik Carter had walked into the pharmacy with $31 in his wallet and a simple plan for the evening. Pick up a bottle of allergy medicine for his mother, catch the number 11 bus toward East Cleveland, buy dinner somewhere cheap, and finish his history assignment before midnight. At 18, Malik had already learned how quickly a small amount of money could disappear. $7 for dinner mattered when every dollar had a purpose. He was passing the pharmacy counter when he heard an older man say, "I must have counted this wrong." Malik slowed. Henry Whitmore stood beneath the bright fluorescent lights wearing a faded olive green veteran's cap and a brown jacket polished smooth at the elbows. Several bills and coins rested on the counter before him. The pharmacy technician spoke gently. "Your remaining copay is $24, sir." Henry checked his wallet again. "I thought it was 12. Your insurance changed the amount this month." Henry looked at the white pharmacy bag behind the technician. "That is my heart medication?" "Yes, sir." Henry exhaled and began gathering his money. Then hold it until tomorrow. Malik had nearly continued walking. It was not his business. His stomach reminded him that lunch had been hours ago, and the $31 in his wallet was supposed to cover dinner and tomorrow morning. Then Henry pushed the medication bag away. Malik stopped. Sir. Henry turned. Yes. How much are you short? Henry gave him a puzzled look. $24, apparently, but that is my problem. Malik stepped closer. I can cover it. Henry shook his head immediately. No, absolutely not. It is $24. Which means it is $24 you earned. Malik smiled faintly. You need the medicine tonight? Henry glanced at the bag. That hesitation answered the question. Malik pulled out his wallet. Then I have got it. Young man, keep your money. Sir, you need your medicine more than I need takeout. Henry studied Malik as if trying to decide whether pride was worth another argument. Finally, his shoulders softened. What is your name? Malik. Malik Carter. Henry Whitmore. Henry offered his hand. United States Army, 32 years. Retired now, obviously. Malik shook it. Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitmore. Henry, the old man corrected. Malik handed the technician $24. The register gave a clean electronic beep. A receipt curled from the printer. Malik accepted it without looking closely and slipped it into his pocket. Henry took his pharmacy bag. Give me your address. I will send this back. No need. Malik, I am serious. So am I. Henry looked down at the medicine, then back at him. Why? Malik considered the question. Because you needed help and I was standing here. Nothing grander than that. Henry nodded slowly. Your parents raised you well. Malik smiled. My mother would probably tell you she is still working on it. Henry laughed, and for the first time since Malik had noticed him, the worry disappeared from his face. Malik glanced at the clock above the counter. His bus would arrive soon. Take care of yourself, Henry. You too, son. Malik turned and headed toward the automatic doors, unaware that he had left his phone on the plastic chair beside the blood pressure machine. He was also unaware that from the end of aisle 6, Richard Coleman had watched only fragments of the exchange, an elderly veteran opening his wallet, a black teenager stepping close, money changing hands, and Malik leaving quickly. Richard had not heard Henry laugh. He had not heard Malik refuse repayment. He had not seen kindness. He had seen just enough to build another story in his own mind. Malik discovered the missing phone halfway to the bus stop. He checked both pockets, stopped beneath the gray Cleveland evening, and sighed. Come on, Malik. He turned around and hurried back toward the pharmacy, never imagining that the $24 he had willingly given away would soon become the easiest part of his night. By the time Malik pushed through the automatic doors again, the number 11 bus was already pulling away from the stop across the street. He watched its red taillights disappear through the Cleveland evening and shook his head. Missing one bus was annoying, but losing his phone would be worse. He headed toward the plastic chairs beside the blood pressure machine, but before he had crossed 15 feet of tile, a voice stopped him. You again? Malik turned. Richard Coleman stood at the end of aisle 6, his blue manager badge clipped neatly above his shirt pocket. Up close, he looked less curious than he had from a distance. His shoulders were squared, his eyes fixed on Malik as though the teenager had returned to finish something Richard had already decided he had started. Yes, sir, Malik said. I left my phone over there. Richard glanced toward the chairs, but did not move aside. Convenient. Malik frowned. What is? Coming back. I forgot my phone. That is what you were saying. Malik looked past him. His phone was visible beneath the edge of the chair, exactly where he remembered setting it. You can see it from here. Richard followed his gaze, but his expression barely changed. Before you go anywhere, I need to ask you about the older gentleman who was here. Henry. Richard narrowed his eyes. You know him pretty well? I met him tonight. But you know his name. Malik breathed slowly through his nose. People usually tell each other their names when they meet. A pharmacy technician behind the counter looked up. Richard lowered his voice, but that only made the suspicion in it feel sharper. I saw him with his wallet open. You moved close to him. Money changed hands. Then you left fast. Malik stared at Richard, finally understanding the story the manager had built. I paid his copay. That is your explanation? That is what happened. Why would an 18-year-old kid pay for a stranger's prescription? Malik almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the question sounded stranger than the answer. Because he was short $24. Richard studied his face. Did he ask you? No. Did you ask him for anything afterward? No. Did you touch his wallet? No. Did you handle his medication? No. Each answer came calmly. But Malik could feel something heavy settling inside his chest. Richard had watched the same moment Malik had lived. Yet somehow the manager had turned generosity into suspicion. Then there should not be a problem, Malik said. He stepped toward his phone. Richard moved sideways, blocking the path without touching him. I need you to stay here. Two customers near the checkout lanes began watching openly now. Malik stopped. Am I being accused of something? I am trying to understand what happened. I just told you. Richard looked toward the front doors. A security guard named Thomas Reed had been standing near the entrance, checking a delivery clipboard. Richard lifted one hand and motioned him over. Malik noticed the gesture. Why do you need security? Because something does not add up. What does not add up? Richard hesitated. You were hovering around a vulnerable customer. Malik's jaw tightened. I was helping him. That is not what it looked like. There it was again. Malik glanced around the store. Nobody had questioned Henry when he accepted $24. Nobody had stopped Malik when he gave it. The suspicion had appeared only after Malik returned alone. Thomas approached, looking from Richard to Malik. Everything all right? Richard answered before Malik could. I want to make sure nothing belonging to that veteran ended up leaving the store. Malik felt the words land. He reached slowly toward his pocket. Richard immediately said, Keep your hands where I can see them. Malik stopped. For one long second, the pharmacy seemed to shrink around him. Then he carefully raised both hands, palms visible. I have a receipt in my pocket, he said. It shows exactly what I paid for. Thomas looked uncertain. Richard did not. We can deal with that in a minute. His eyes dropped to the worn black backpack on Malik's shoulder. First, I want to see what is inside the bag. Malik held Richard Coleman's gaze for a moment, then looked at Thomas Reed. The security guard did not reach for the backpack. Instead, he asked, Did anyone report something missing? Richard's mouth tightened. Not yet. Malik caught those two words immediately. Not yet, he repeated. So nobody said I stole anything. I did not use that word, Richard replied. You did not have to. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere behind the pharmacy counter, a label printer rattled and stopped. Malik could feel people watching now, not casually, but with the uncomfortable attention strangers gave a situation they did not understand. He lowered his hand slowly. My receipt is in my right pocket. May I take it out? Thomas nodded. Go ahead. Malik reached carefully into his jeans and removed the folded paper. He opened it on the counter, smoothing the crease beneath his fingertips. $24, he said. That is what Henry was short. Richard glanced down. The transaction time matched the moment he had seen Malik beside Henry. The pharmacy counter number matched. The payment amount was printed clearly. Still, Richard did not step back. A receipt does not tell me what happened before or after the purchase. Malik stared at him, then asked the technician. The young pharmacy technician looked over from her workstation. Richard turned toward her. Did you see this transaction? She hesitated. I processed it. And Mr. Whitmore did not have enough for the copay. Malik paid the remaining balance. A small silence followed. Malik expected that to end it. Instead, Richard asked, Did you watch them the entire time? Her eyebrows drew together. No. I was filling prescriptions. Richard looked back at Malik as if that uncertainty had restored something he wanted to believe. Exactly. Malik felt heat rise along his neck. Exactly what? Richard folded his arms. Kids like you need to understand how this looks. The words seemed to change the temperature of the room. Malik did not answer immediately. A woman near the greeting cards lowered the box she had been holding. Thomas shifted his weight. Even the technician stopped typing. Malik's eyes remained on Richard. Kids like me. Richard blinked once. You know what I mean. No, sir. Malik's voice was quiet. Say what you mean. Richard glanced around and seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, how many people were listening. I mean teenagers coming into stores, approaching vulnerable customers, hanging around transactions. We have to be careful. Malik nodded once. I came in wearing a school hoodie and carrying a backpack. I paid for a veteran's medicine. Then I left. You are simplifying it. No. I am telling you what happened. Richard's jaw tightened. And I am responsible for this store. Then be responsible for the facts. Thomas looked at Malik, and something in his expression changed. Not sympathy exactly. Recognition. Malik pointed toward the Dark camera dome above register 3. You do not have to believe me. Richard followed his finger. You do not have to believe the technician. You do not even have to believe the receipt in front of you. Malik pushed the paper another inch across the counter. But that camera does not care what I look like. Nobody spoke. Richard's face hardened. Security can review it after we finish here. Malik glanced down at his backpack. Finish what? Checking the bag. Malik swallowed. He could have opened it immediately. He had nothing to hide. But something about being asked to prove innocence after the evidence was already sitting on the counter felt wrong. If I let you look, Malik said, I want this documented. Richard frowned. Documented how? Write down why you stopped me. Write down what you thought I took. Write down that nobody reported anything missing. Then write down what you find in my bag. Thomas looked at Richard. The manager's confidence flickered. Malik continued. And after that, we watched the camera. Richard stared at him. You are making this harder than it needs to be. Malik shook his head. No, sir. I am making sure nobody gets to change the story later. He removed the backpack from his shoulder and placed it gently on the counter, but kept one hand resting over the zipper. Put it in writing, Malik said. Then I will open it. Richard looked at Malik's hand resting over the zipper, then at the customers who had quietly become witnesses. For the first time since stopping him, the manager seemed aware that this was no longer a private suspicion. Thomas, get an incident form, Richard said. Thomas Reed hesitated. What should I put as the reason? Richard glanced toward Malik. Suspicious interaction with a customer. Malik shook his head. That is not what you accused me of. Richard's eyes narrowed. I have not accused you of anything. You called security. You stopped me from getting my phone. You asked to search my backpack because you thought something belonging to Henry might be inside it. The woman near the greeting cards looked directly at Richard now. Thomas held his clipboard without writing. He is right. The pharmacy. Technician said quietly. Richard turned toward her. Excuse me. She swallowed. He paid Mr. Whitmore's copay. I processed the transaction. Richard exhaled through his nose. Just write the report, Thomas. The guard placed the clipboard on the counter. Possible property concern involving elderly customer. He read aloud as he wrote. Malik pointed toward the paper. Add that no missing property was reported. Thomas paused, then wrote it. And add that I showed the receipt before the search. Another pause. Another line. Richard's face had gone rigid. Satisfied? Not yet, Malik said. He removed his hand from the zipper. Now you can look. Thomas spoke first. Malik, you can open it yourself. Malik nodded. He pulled the zipper slowly. The sound seemed strangely loud in the quiet store. He removed a United States history textbook, a spiral notebook, 2 pencils, a gray school sweatshirt, his mother's unopened allergy medicine, and an empty plastic lunch container. He placed each item carefully on the counter. Nothing else. No prescription bottle. No wallet. No cash except the $7 still folded inside Malik's own wallet. Thomas looked inside the backpack, then stepped back. Nothing related to Mr. Whitmore. Malik watched Richard. Write that down too. Thomas did. A customer near register 2 whispered something to her husband. Another man looked away when Malik caught his eye. That hurt more than Malik expected. 10 minutes ago, he had been another student trying to get home before dark. Now strangers had watched his school books spread across a pharmacy counter as though ordinary pieces of his life needed to prove he belonged there. Malik began putting everything back. His fingers remained steady until he reached the empty lunch container. He remembered the dinner he had decided he could skip. $24 had seemed simple when Henry needed medicine. This was different. This cost nothing, yet somehow felt heavier. Richard cleared his throat. All right. It appears you do not have anything. Malik stopped. Appears. Thomas looked at Richard. The bag is clear. That is what I meant. Malik zipped the backpack. Then we watched the camera. Richard glanced toward the office behind the customer service desk. There is no reason to keep this going. Malik almost smiled at the contradiction. 5 minutes ago, you said the receipt did not explain everything. The search is finished. The search you wanted is finished. The question I asked is not. Richard lowered his voice. You should take your phone and go home. Malik looked toward the plastic chair. His phone was still there, untouched. I will go home after we see what happened. Malik, Thomas said carefully. I can review the footage and document it. Malik studied him. Will the report say why Mr. Coleman stopped me before anyone reported a theft? Thomas did not answer immediately. Richard did. I was protecting an elderly customer. Malik turned toward him. From what? Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. Malik pointed toward the camera above register 3. That is what I want to know. The pharmacy technician stepped closer to the counter. The footage should still be available. Richard looked around the store. Every face seemed to be waiting. Finally, he picked up the office keys. Fine, he said. We will review it. Malik lifted his backpack onto one shoulder. Good. Richard started toward the office, but Malik remained beside the counter for one more second, looking at the incident report beneath Thomas's hand. The page now contained facts Richard had not expected to write down. No theft reported. Receipt provided. Backpack checked. Nothing found. Malik raised his eyes toward the silent camera. There was only one witness left to hear from, and unlike everyone else in the store, it had never decided what kind of person Malik was before he walked through the door. The security office was barely larger than a storage closet, with 2 metal chairs, a desk crowded with paperwork, and 4 security monitors glowing against the dim wall. Malik stood near the doorway while Richard Coleman unlocked the recording system. Thomas Reed remained beside him with the incident report tucked under one arm. The pharmacy technician, whose name tag read Emily Parker, stayed just outside the office where she could see the main monitor. Richard clicked through several menus. What time was the transaction? He asked. Emily answered immediately. 6:43. Richard pulled the recording back. Grainy color filled the screen. Register 3 appeared from above, along with the waiting chairs and part of the pharmacy counter. Malik saw himself enter the frame, wearing the same school hoodie and backpack he had on now. Henry Whitmore stood at the counter with his wallet open. Nobody spoke. The recording had no useful audio, but the movements were clear. Henry counted his money. He stopped. The technician pointed toward the register display. Henry checked his wallet again, then slowly pushed the pharmacy bag away. Malik appeared at the edge of the picture. He paused. He spoke to Henry. Henry shook his head. Malik reached into his own wallet. Richard leaned closer to the monitor. On screen, Malik handed money to Emily. The register drawer opened. The receipt printed. Emily gave Henry the medication. Henry offered Malik his hand. They shook hands. Then Henry said something that made Malik smile. Malik walked toward the waiting area, sat briefly beside the blood pressure machine, checked the time, and hurried toward the exit. His phone remained on the chair. Thomas broke the silence. That seems pretty clear. Richard did not answer. Malik watched the screen rather than the manager. Seeing the moment from above made it look almost painfully ordinary. There had been no secret exchange. No manipulation. No reason for suspicion. Just an old man who needed medicine and a teenager who happened to have $24. Richard moved the recording forward. Henry remained at the counter for another minute. He spoke with Emily, touched the brim of his veteran's cap, and left carrying only his pharmacy bag. Keep going, Malik said. Richard glanced at him. We already saw the transaction. Keep going. Richard advanced the video. Several minutes passed on the timestamp. Then Malik appeared again, entering through the automatic doors and heading directly toward the chair where his phone still waited. Before he reached it, Richard entered the frame from aisle 6 and stepped into his path. Malik watched himself stop. He watched Richard question him. He watched Thomas approach. Then came the moment when Malik reached toward his pocket and Richard reacted. Even without sound, the body language told enough. Malik froze, lifted his hands, and carefully removed the receipt. Emily looked down. Thomas stared at the monitor. Richard's face had lost its earlier certainty. There, Malik said softly. Richard did not respond. That is the whole story. Thomas set the incident report on the desk. I need to update this. Richard finally leaned back. Yes. His voice sounded smaller inside the cramped office. Malik looked at him. You saw Henry's wallet. You saw me standing near him. But you did not see what happened. Richard rubbed one hand across his chin. I made a judgment based on incomplete information. You made a judgment about me. Richard's eyes lifted. Malik did not raise his voice. The incomplete information was there for everybody. You were the one who decided what it meant. Silence settled over the room. The monitors continued glowing, indifferent and exact. Richard looked toward the footage again, where Malik's earlier self was frozen beside register 3, $24 lighter, and already turning toward the door. Malik, Richard began. Malik shook his head once. I came back from my phone. He stepped out of the office, crossed the store, and picked it up from beneath the chair. When he returned, Thomas handed him a copy of the incident report. "Keep this," he said. Malik folded it beside the receipt. Richard stood several feet away. "I am sorry this happened." Malik looked at him. It did not just happen. Richard fell silent. Malik slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward the automatic doors. Outside, the Cleveland air had turned colder, and another bus was approaching beneath the streetlights. Behind him, inside the pharmacy, the camera continued recording. At 9:17 that night, Malik's phone vibrated across the small kitchen table just as he was spreading peanut butter across 2 slices of bread. His mother was working a late shift at university hospitals, and the apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the faint traffic moving along the wet Cleveland streets outside. Malik glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. After the pharmacy, he had no interest in another conversation with a stranger. The phone buzzed again. Malik wiped his hand on a paper towel and answered. "Hello." A man's voice came through, controlled and professional. "Am I speaking with Malik Carter?" Malik straightened. "Who is asking?" "My name is Daniel Whitmore." The last name caught him immediately. Malik set the knife down. "Whitmore? Henry Whitmore is my father." Malik looked toward the folded pharmacy receipt, an incident report lying beside his history textbook. "Is he all right?" "He is fine. He took his medication with dinner." "Actually, you are the reason he was able to." Malik exhaled. "I'm glad he got home safely." There was a brief silence. "My father has spent the last 2 hours telling me about an 18-year-old who gave up his dinner money for a stranger and then refused to give him an address for repayment." Malik smiled despite himself. "He told you that?" "Several times." Daniel's voice softened. "He also told me he tried to argue with you." "He did. That sounds like my father." Malik looked down at his sandwich. "Mr. Whitmore, I really do not need the money back." "Daniel, please. And I am not calling about the $24. Something in his tone changed. Malik's smile disappeared. "Then why are you calling?" Daniel paused. "Because my father realized after he got home that he never properly thanked you. He called the pharmacy hoping they could pass along a message. He had used his loyalty account during the transaction, and the store had a record connected to the purchase. During that conversation, he learned there had been an incident after he left." Malik's fingers tightened around the phone. "Who told him?" "The pharmacy technician. Emily Parker." Malik said nothing. "She did not give him private details," Daniel continued. "She told him enough to understand that you had returned and been questioned about your interaction with him. My father called me immediately." Malik stared through the kitchen window at headlights sliding across the damp pavement below. "It is handled." "Is it?" Daniel asked. Malik looked at the incident report. "They checked my bag. They checked the camera. The camera showed what happened." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Malik, I am an attorney. I spent 15 years telling clients that details matter. So I want to ask you one question, and I want the complete answer. What happened after my father walked out of that store?" Malik leaned back. He did not want to relive it. Then he remembered Richard saying, "Kids like you." He remembered the customers watching his textbooks being placed on the counter. He remembered having to ask for the reason to be written down. So Malik told Daniel everything. He kept his voice even. He exaggerated nothing. When he finished, Daniel did not speak immediately. "Are you still there?" Malik asked. "Yes." Daniel's voice was different now. Lower. "I was taking notes." Malik glanced at the clock. "What happens now?" "First, nothing happens without your permission." That answer surprised him. "Second, I want the store to preserve every second of that security footage and every document connected to the incident." "Why?" "Because an apology made after the evidence appears is not the same thing as accountability." Malik looked again at the folded report. Daniel continued. "My father already asked the store to preserve the footage. I have also spoken with the district office. They confirmed it is being retained." Malik sat forward. "You already called them?" "My father raised me to move quickly when something matters." For the first time that evening, Malik almost laughed. "That sounds like him." "There is one more thing," Daniel said. "The district manager wants to meet tomorrow. They asked whether you would attend." Malik's eyes moved to the $7 beside his wallet, the money left after helping Henry. "Do they want me there so they can apologize?" "Probably. That is not enough." Daniel became silent. Malik continued. "I do not want somebody saying sorry because a camera proved them wrong. I want to know what happens to the next kid when there is no camera." On the other end, Daniel took a slow breath. "Malik," he said, "that is exactly why I called." The next afternoon, Malik sat at the far end of a conference table inside the pharmacy district office in downtown Cleveland, his backpack resting beside his chair and the folded incident report placed carefully in front of him. Daniel Whitmore sat to his right in a charcoal suit, not speaking for Malik, simply making sure nobody spoke around him. Henry sat beside his son, wearing the same faded veteran's cap Malik remembered from the pharmacy. Across the table were Richard Coleman and District Manager Susan Bennett. Richard looked different without the store counter between them. Smaller somehow. Less certain. Susan opened a folder. Malik, I reviewed the security footage personally. Malik nodded. Then you know what happened. I do. She glanced toward Richard. And what happened did not meet our standards. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I think we should be more precise than that. Susan paused. You are right. Malik was stopped without a report of theft or missing property. He provided a valid receipt, and an employee confirmed his explanation. Despite that, the interaction continued and his backpack was inspected. Henry's jaw tightened. Malik remained still. Richard finally looked at him. Malik, I owe you an apology. Malik waited. Richard swallowed. I made assumptions. I thought I was protecting Mr. Whitmore, but the footage showed that he never needed protection from you. Henry spoke quietly. That boy was the only person in the store who noticed I needed help. Richard lowered his eyes. I understand that now. Malik looked at him. Do you? Richard raised his head. Yes. Then tell me why you kept going after Emily confirmed I paid. The room went silent. Richard looked toward Susan, then back at Malik. Because by then I was convinced something had happened, and I kept looking for evidence that proved me right. Malik nodded slowly. That is the first thing you have said that sounds honest. Susan closed the folder. We are conducting a formal review of the incident and Richard's actions. Daniel asked. And what changes are being made? Susan slid a printed document across the table. Effective immediately, employees cannot request a bag inspection based solely on an employee's suspicion without documenting a specific reported concern. When circumstances allow, available transaction records and relevant security footage must be reviewed before escalating an interaction. We are also requiring updated bias awareness training for managers and security staff throughout the district. Malik read the page carefully. Throughout the district? All 27 locations under my supervision, Susan said. Henry looked at Malik with quiet pride. Richard shifted in his chair. Susan has also informed me that my position is under review. Malik looked up. Are you being fired? That has not been decided, Susan answered. Daniel remained silent, leaving the question where it belonged. Malik thought about the night before. He remembered Richard blocking his path, the backpack on the counter, the strangers watching. Anger would have been easy. Instead, Malik looked directly at Susan. Do not fire him for me. Richard blinked. Susan leaned back. Malik, you are not responsible for the employment decision. I know. I am saying what I want. He turned toward Richard. If you lose your job today, maybe you learn that you embarrassed the wrong person. I do not want that lesson. Richard stared at him. Then what lesson do you want me to learn? Malik placed the policy document beside the incident report. That I should not have needed a lawyer's phone call to be treated fairly. Nobody moved. Malik continued. Yesterday you looked at me and decided what kind of person I was before you knew anything about me. Then every fact I gave you had to fight against the story you already believed. Richard's face tightened with shame. You are right. So learn from it. Then make sure the next black kid who walks into your store does not have to be perfect, calm, polite, and standing under a camera just to be believed. Henry slowly removed his veteran's cap and rested it on the table. Richard looked at Malik for several seconds. I cannot undo what I did. No, Malik said, but you can decide what you do next. Susan reached for the policy document. We will implement these changes, and Malik, I would like your written feedback before the final version is distributed. Malik nodded. Daniel finally spoke. That sounds like accountability. Henry smiled faintly. Sounds like something else too. Malik looked at him. What? Henry placed his cap back on his head. $24 turned out to be one expensive lesson. A quiet laugh moved around the table, even Richard managing a small, embarrassed smile. But Malik did not laugh for long. He looked through the conference room window at the Cleveland skyline under a pale afternoon sky and understood something Richard was only beginning to learn. Kindness had brought Malik into Henry's life, but kindness did not require silence when something was wrong. Sometimes kindness paid for a stranger's medicine. Sometimes it stayed calm beneath suspicion. And sometimes it gave the person who failed you one chance to become better than the mistake he made. 3 weeks later, Malik stepped through the same automatic doors just after 4 in the afternoon. Outside, a cold Cleveland wind pushed dry leaves along the sidewalk. But inside the pharmacy, everything looked almost exactly as it had before. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The prescription printer still clicked behind the counter. The blood pressure machine still stood beside the row of plastic chairs. Malik noticed all of it because his body remembered the room before his mind could tell him there was nothing to fear. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and walked toward the allergy aisle. His mother had texted him that morning asking him to pick up another bottle on his way home from school. That was all this visit was supposed to be. An ordinary errand. Malik chose the bottle and headed toward Register 3. Richard Coleman was standing behind it. Their eyes met. For a second, neither spoke. Then Richard stepped forward. "Hello, Malik." "Mr. Coleman." Richard scanned the allergy medicine. One electronic beep. Nothing more. No suspicious glance toward the backpack. No question about where Malik had been. No security guard moving closer. Richard placed the bottle into a small paper bag. "Your total is $11.48. Malik handed him. $12. Richard counted the change and placed it in Malik's palm. "Thank you." Malik nodded. "Thank you." It was such a normal exchange that Malik almost smiled. Then a familiar voice came from behind him. "You planning to disappear before an old man can repay his debt again?" Malik turned. Henry Whitmore stood near the pharmacy counter wearing his olive green veteran's cap and carrying a cane he had not used during their first meeting. Daniel stood several feet behind him, smiling. Malik laughed. "Henry, I told you there was no debt. And I told you I spent 32 years in the Army. We are trained to ignore bad instructions." Henry walked over and placed $24 on the counter. Malik immediately pushed it back. No, Henry pushed it toward him again. "Yes. I am not taking it." "Then we might be here until closing." Richard watched quietly from behind the register. Malik looked at Daniel. "Are you going to help me?" Daniel shook his head. "I am a lawyer. I know when a case is unwinnable." Henry tapped the money with one finger. "Dinner." Malik started to object. Henry raised his hand. "This time, do not argue with an old soldier." Malik looked at the $24 and remembered the first night. Henry counting bills, the medicine waiting behind the counter, his own empty lunch container spread out for strangers to inspect. So much had happened because of a number small enough to fit inside a wallet. Malik finally picked up the money. "Fine. Dinner." Henry smiled. "Good." Malik folded the bills once and slipped them into his wallet. Near the employee entrance, a new notice had been posted beneath the customer service policy. It explained that concerns involving customers had to be based on specific behavior and documented facts, with supervisory review before discretionary bag inspections whenever circumstances allowed. Malik read it without comment. Richard followed his gaze. "The district finished the training last week," he said. "All 27 stores." Malik looked at him. Richard continued. "I thought you should know. How did it go?" Richard considered the question. "Uncomfortable." Malik waited. Richard gave a small nod. "Which probably means I needed it." Malik nodded back. Nothing else had to be said. Henry and Daniel headed toward the doors, and Malik followed. Before stepping outside, he glanced once over his shoulder. Richard was helping another customer, listening carefully while she explained a problem with her prescription. Thomas Reed stood near the entrance, speaking with an employee instead of watching the customers. Emily Parker waved from behind the pharmacy counter. Malik raised his hand in return. Then he walked outside. The late afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, turning the windows along the block gold. A number 11 bus approached in the distance. Henry stood beside Malik beneath the bus shelter, his veteran's cap tilted against the wind. Daniel waited near the curb. No speeches followed. No celebration. Henry simply rested one hand on Malik's shoulder for a moment, then let it fall. Malik looked through the pharmacy window. Richard glanced up from the register and met his eyes. This time, there was no suspicion between them, only recognition. The bus pulled to the curb with a soft hiss. Malik stepped aboard, found a seat beside the window, and watched Henry grow smaller behind the glass as Cleveland moved around him again. In Malik's pocket were $24. In his backpack were the same books that had once been spread across a counter to prove what he had not done. And behind him, on a pharmacy wall he would probably never see again, New words remained in place because one 18-year-old had refused to let someone else's assumption become the truth.